Akhila Bandlora. I'm a Future Blue Youth Council member. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm trying to think of other fun facts or like helpful details. I'm studying ecology and psychology in school, and my favorite marine animal is an octopus. Okay, I'm gonna pass it to Sylvia.
Oh, I gotta make sure I remember all that. Hi, I'm Sylvia Nica. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm also a Future Blue Youth Council member. I'm gonna be a freshman at Wellesley College, probably gonna study English and environmental science, and my favorite animal switches a lot, but right now it's probably the sea turtle. Gonna pass it off to E Wen.
Hi, my name's E Wen. I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand. I'm studying law, environmental science, and geography. I'm another Future Blue Youth Council member, and my favourite marine animal are corals because they're just beautiful creatures and they also protect our coastlines from storm and erosion, so that really compounds their beauty. So over the course of this webinar, we're going to be providing you with some grant writing tips, answering questions that you've sent in and working through steps like the budget and the Cognito form. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll keep an eye out and ensure that we weave them through the discussion. So I guess without further ado, let's get stuck into some general grant writing tips. Sylvia and Akhila, what do you guys consider the most important points to keep in mind when writing a grant application?
Well, I say this at least 50 times. If you've watched the other webinars, you probably heard me say it too, but I feel like it's so important, I have to. Clarity. So it doesn't matter if you have like Shakespearean level prose, as if the funder can't understand what your project is, where the money's going, who your audience is, it's much less likely to be, I don't know, understood and to be funded. So just generally when you're applying to grants, just make sure that you're very clear in your application.
That's a really good tip. And I guess one of my tips kind of bounces off of that, and that's to proofread your grant application. And this is just like true of any writing you submit, make sure to proofread it. One general like step I do before I submit anything is like give it a few days and then look back at it then, because you'll definitely like, or this is another tip, but change the font or increase the font or something, and just like looking at your application in a different light might point out mistakes that you didn't see when you're going over it the first time. And on that same note, make sure you can also give your application to someone who isn't familiar with your project or what you're doing and ask them to look over that and see if what you're saying makes sense to them. And yeah, that could be a really good way to proofread too. Or pass to E Wen or Sylvia, either.
E Wen, you can go.
Awesome. So that segues nicely into my suggestion to ensure that you're not leaving your application to the last minute. So give yourself as much time as possible to consider the questions, to proofread, as Akhila said, and to refine the content of your application, giving consideration to these webinars, our suggestions, and the wealth of resources that we have up on our fellowship website. So if you haven't checked those out yet, I definitely recommend giving them a look. Do you have anything to add, Sylvia?
I just have one more tip. There's a very fixed set of characters that you can have in the application. I think some are like 1,000 characters, some are 750 characters, but make sure that you're really taking advantage of that to be thorough and to give details in your application. If it says 1,000 characters, you probably don't want to do like 5 characters, to just make sure that you're being really thorough in your application, because to make sure that we can understand it.
I was just gonna say, I think E Wen mentioned this, but yeah, make sure to watch these videos. We have all of them up on Bowseat's website, and we can put Bowseat's website in the chat too. But we have been going through the application and just giving tips and holding office hours. We actually have office hours, I believe it's next week, but someone can jump in and confirm that or dispute that.
Midnight 24th of July.
Yes.
Eastern time.
Yes. So if you walk away from this webinar and you're like, I have so many more questions, make sure to check that out and get those questions answered, because we want you all to have a really good shot of getting this grant. So yeah.
Awesome. So we're just going to head off now into talking about how the applications will be evaluated, and therefore some tips that you might want to consider through that.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the first one, which is, these are all found on the application website so they're all found on the website. And the first one is aligns with the fellowship program's goals. So we want to make sure that this is a good fit. If there's another grant program that would fit better, then you'd have a better chance applying for that, if that makes sense. So just make sure that when you read through all the eligibility rules, that you're checking off each one, just to make sure that you have a really good shot at getting the grant.
Definitely, and also think about how you are demonstrating knowledge of the water issue that your project is addressing. So include appropriate terminology where relevant, and research the challenge thoroughly so that you ensure that your solution or project adequately addresses the challenge. And also, if your project is local or community based, try to make mention of how that water issue is affecting your community in particular, and how your project addresses your community needs, rather than being a general solution that that could be implemented by anyone, anywhere.
When you're, I guess mine is when you're using, filling out the application and you're thinking about how to describe your project. Obviously, this isn't like the ocean awareness contest where creativity is the main thing, but make sure that your project, if it does have a creative component, if it does have an educational component, make sure to state that really clearly. If you have more information that's educational or creative, make sure to include that in the supplemental material. The supplemental material shouldn't carry your application. The application should really be the bulk of your project and should be the main aspect, but if you have these aspects, make sure to include them in the supplemental material.
Okay.
I guess I have one.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. I guess I have one more. Just make sure you're being really thoughtful and intentional in your project and your description. So whatever that means to you, whether that means you're describing it clearly, you're including a lot of details, you're really being careful about your word choices because it is such a fixed amount of characters. And that can even come down to proofreading. So just make sure you're being really thoughtful in your application.
Awesome. And also think about how feasible your project and your project's goals are. So how realistic are they? We care just as much about small projects as we do large scale ones, because naturally the small projects compound into large scale change, and a small project tailored to your community may even have more of an impact than a global project which your community may not resonate with. So when you're thinking about feasibility, keep that in mind when you're framing your goals. So the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, targeted, could be quite handy when you're thinking about framing your goals, which is one of the questions in the grant application.
Okay, cool. And then the last one, and it's on the line of impact, is we want to make sure that there are measurable impacts that are included in your project. So a measurable impact could be, I want to host an art gallery, let's say, to raise awareness about my community's water issues. And you could have a lot of little steps to lead up to that. Like, I need to reach out to venues, and I need to create a flyer, and I need to do XYZ. It's really good to see those goals, because then we know that you're thinking in a way where you see yourself actually achieving your project and you have steps to get there. And on your end too, that it's really good to have goals, like small little goals that you can definitely like check off and be like, oh, I'm getting closer and closer to my project. So yeah, that is what we have for application evaluations. And now I think we're going to be moving on to the budget. So, oh, do you have a question? Yes, Robbie, you can ask your question.
I'm Robbie. I'm zooming in from London right now. It's very late here. So my question is there an increased advantage to either keeping costs down or to thinking really big, even if this comes with an increased cost?
I think it's totally up to you. It really depends on which water issue that you're trying to solve and what you think would be. So if it's community based, what you think would be the best solution. So obviously don't put unnecessary costs into your budget or whatever, but try to make it realistic, as I said, and just, yeah, think carefully about it. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, because we'll be looking at each project on a case-by-case basis.
And I think to add to that, when thinking about a larger project versus smaller project, just sort of bouncing off E Wen's point, to make sure to look at it through the lens of feasibility. So there might be a project with a smaller budget that is more or less feasible, or maybe there's a project with a bigger budget where you already have the funding or you have community partners you can work with to make it done. I mean, I think one example we've used is obviously if your project doesn't clean the entire New York harbor for like $70,000, that's probably not going to happen. But if you have a project with a bigger budget and you have ways to support it, or it is feasible, as long as you're looking through that lens of feasibility, like there's no real advantage over one or the other.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. I'm going to screen share the budget and we can go through it. Is this working? Yay, okay, cool. Okay. Oh my gosh. Feel free to jump in at any point, but this is fairly basic. So put your name here if you're the project leader, or put your project name here and then put your name down here if you're the project leader. And then we're going to move into the income section. So this is pretty self-explanatory. If you have any other grants coming in, make sure to put that down here. It's totally okay if you don't have any other grants coming in. Just make sure to list it if you do, and make sure to put the dollar amount of that grant in USD. And then fundraising or other forms of cash income. So that would be donations, ticket sales, maybe your parents are helping out a little bit, but just make sure to put that down. And again, sure to put it in USD. And then you can calculate that and that would be your total income. It's totally okay if it's $0. If you're coming up with a new project, that's totally normal. Sylvia, E Wen, do you guys have anything to add? Okay, cool. Okay, and then we're gonna move into expenses. So first we have supplies. So what's listed here, trash bags, Wi-Fi, pencils, just, yeah, whatever you think you need for your project. And then we're gonna move on into technology. So if you have a website, I think there was a question in the chat about website domain and hosting, but I can't see it right now because I'm screen sharing. So if someone wants to read it.
Yeah, so the question is, for my project, we will have a website domain. How should we fill in the boxes where it says numbers needed and cost per unit? So what you do is you just say 1 for number needed and put the cost of the website domain. So let's say it's $120 for the year. Just put 1 in number needed and 120 in cost per unit. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, cool. And then we're gonna move into space rental. So I keep going back to art gallery. Your project does not need to be centered on art, but that's the one I keep thinking of. But if you, or if you want to host a town hall, I'm gonna branch out. So you want to host a town hall and you need to find a space, put the cost of that space in here. And then again, number needed and cost. And then marketing costs. So this could be printing flyers, press release distribution, also Instagram ads or Facebook ads is usually a pretty common one. And yeah, and then other project specific costs. So anything else you think you need that's not specified in this list, make sure to put it down here. And it's better to be upfront with your costs rather than, or not even upfront, but try and be really thorough with what you're planning to spend money on for the sake of like project planning later in the future and also for our purposes so we know what to be judging you or evaluating the budget based off of. And then, yeah, so then you'll be adding up all these amounts and you will put it in here. And then you can calculate your total remaining costs at the bottom using this formula, which is expenses, which is right here, and then income. Yeah, and I don't know if Sylvia or E Wen have anything to add, so I'm going to stop talking for a bit. Let them speak.
We also had, thanks Akhila, we also had a question that came through which asked, how do I calculate the total remaining costs? So if you download the Excel spreadsheet, the budget template, the formulas are already included within that Excel spreadsheet, so it should do it all for you. But just remembering that the total remaining cost is just the expenses minus the income.
Okay, cool. If you all have any questions about the budget, make sure to ask them in the chat. If not, I will switch screens. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I have a question for the fundraisers. So for my group, we're planning to create fundraisers in September to October, but we're not sure how much we're gonna raise. So what should we put in the box? Because we can't have a specific number of amount of money we're gonna raise.
That's a really good question. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think, and feel free to jump in, but I think that since the amount is not determinable before you submit your application, you should leave it blank. And if you do get money from August through December, that's amazing. And you can maybe send us an email. I don't know how that would work, but I think for the application, I would just leave it as 0 or maybe leave a note.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, if you want to add in the actual written part of your application, just a note saying like from this, because I think there is a timeline question or a question about the timeline of your project. If even there you want to add, like, I think, did you say it would happen in October? Or I guess whichever date you said it would happen, just add a note in the timeline saying we are hoping to have like a fundraiser during this point, just so even if you don't have the fixed amount of money, we're aware that it's happening. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen and we can go over the application really fast. Or not really fast, with adequate time. Let's just pull it up. Okay, do you guys see it? Okay, cool. My screen sharing is working very well today. I'm very happy. Okay. Does anyone want to explain this part? I can just scroll. Or I can do it.
And we also had another question in the chat. I don't know if you saw, Akhila. Do you want me to read it out?
No, I did not. Please read it out. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So Robbie says, I noticed on Bowseat's website that there is a mentoring aspect to this grant. What does this include? I guess I could talk really briefly. I don't know. My internet's been super weird, so I think I've been freezing and cutting out. So sorry about that. But we have a bunch of really cool people on the Future Blue Youth Council that have a bunch of skills, either marketing skills or graphic design skills. Like it's a huge, huge variety. So like if your project is selected and you need mentoring on a specific aspect, such as marketing, such as graphic design, maybe where you aren't as strong, we will provide that mentorship to help your project really reach its, I don't know, potential. But even before that, like we are offering office hours, we're offering these webinars, we're offering like toolkits. So that is, even if you don't get it, those are part of the mentoring and resources. So even if you don't get the grant, make sure that you're taking advantage of like these so-called like available to all mentoring resources like the toolkits or the office hours. I don't know if you guys wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and we'll just be around to answer any random questions that you might have, because a few of us have done maybe similar projects that you guys are planning, and there's always some kind of small thing that you've never thought of before, and you've suddenly just got to create a partnership proposal and you're like, what does that look like? I've never done one of those before. So we're just there to answer any questions or help you walk through things that you might not be familiar with. So just knowing that you guys aren't alone. It's not just like we're handing you guys a grant and then you're going to do your project and then you're going to come back to us. So we're always going to be there if you need anything.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. You guys summed it up really well. But are there any other questions before we jump into the application? Or I guess we could save those for the end too. I don't know how, I think that might work a little bit better, but I will just go over the first part and then I can pass it off to someone. But so first we have basically just a bunch of basic information you have to fill out. Project leader, hometown, your age, email, and then if you have any other group members, a supporting adult, and then we start jumping into the more meatier questions. So project name, and then indicate if your project is new or old. And I think we wanted to pause here and discuss a little bit more about this. I am going to mute myself and let someone do that.
Sorry, I think that was me. I think so it can be kind of confusing on the application where you see like if your project is 1 to 2 years old, or if you're like, I don't know, it can just be a little bit confusing. Just to clarify, so you can be in a club, like if your school has an environmental club that's been going on for 10 years, you can still apply for this grant as long as the specific project that you guys came up with or that you are seeking funding for is less than 2 years old. So if your project is brand new, great. You don't even need to really consider it if it's just something that you're at your house thinking of, and it's just something that you just thought up for this application. But if you have like an environmental club or you have an organization or a nonprofit that you started on your own, as long as the specific project that you're seeking funding for is less than 2 years old, it is eligible to be applied for funding. If I don't know if that made sense. If I don't know, Akhila or E Wen wants to clarify.
Sorry, I was like struggling to find the unmute button. But yeah, and then we move into project description, and big emphasis here, it can either be a text or a videos, and there's no differentiation between both of those, whichever medium you feel more comfortable expressing yourself in and can provide like better clarity in, go for it. And then we jump into the project proposal. And I don't know if either of you want to say anything about the project proposal. I think I'll just say when you're describing your community need, this was mostly covered in the grant writing tips, but make sure it's really well researched and thorough. And yeah, just a lot of details will help us understand since we may not be familiar with the community's need.
I think the only thing I wanted to add is who is your target audience? That's who your project is serving. So say you're putting on a conference for high school students, your target audience is high school students aged like, I don't know, whatever high school students the ages are for your country. So just a quick clarification on that.
Yeah, that sounds good. And a lot of these questions are super specific to your project. So if you have any questions about what exactly they mean or how exactly they relate to your project, make sure or feel free to like DM us on Instagram or shoot us an email. I'm not sure there's any other ones we wanted to specifically go over besides who's your target audience, but I totally could be wrong.
Also, Akhila, could you scroll down a little bit, please?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a box there for supporting documentation. So that's where you can include things like references, quotes, cost quotes, perhaps an artistic representation of your project, whatever you think is necessary. But I think Sylvia mentioned this earlier, but this documentation should not be carrying your application. So keep it as restrained as possible. Don't go adding 15 documents in there, because then that text or the videos that you're submitting through the main part of the application is what we'll be focusing on primarily.
I think I'm the only one left on here, and I don't want to keep you guys late and I have to get to bed because it's past 10 here in London. But I'll have my application in this week. And thank you for holding this.
Thank you so much for coming and for staying up.
All right, thank you.
Okay, cool. I think those are the only questions we wanted to provide clarification on. But again, if you have any questions about how these questions apply to your specific project, make sure to DM us or email us. But yeah, I'm gonna stop screen sharing right now.
Cool. So I think that's the end of this webinar, if you guys don't have anything to add. So reminder that the deadline for the fellowship is the 1st of August. So that's coming up really quickly. So make sure to get your applications going and submit it before that deadline. If you've got any questions, feel free to flick us an email or a DM on Instagram. And we've also got one more office hours webinar on the 24th of July at 12 a.m. Eastern time. So if you have any last minute questions as you're filling out your application, head over there and we'll be able to answer them. Thanks so much for coming along to this webinar. Bye.
Yeah, we're so excited to read your applications.